Hi all, this is Pius over at Pius Labs here in Austin, Texas. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the design process. In fact, it comes up in my book, Engineer's Guide to Improv and Art Games. It kind of assumes in my book that you already are familiar with the design process. And I have a diagram of it, I guess on page 8 here. This diagram of the engineering design process uses fancy words like create prototype or evaluate or ideate. And not everyone might know what these words mean. Maybe not everyone went through engineering school, or maybe they did go to engineering school, but they didn't get taught a specific design process. I did not when I got my bioengineering degree. So I just wanted to talk in detail about this. First of all, this diagram is based on something from teachengineering.org, which is a great resource. So you should check them out if you haven't. But really, teachengineering.org is just one organization that talks about this design process. And there are many other organizations that talk about what the engineering design process is. Definitely not just my book, not just teachengineering.org, but you've got Stanford. They're really famous for having a design process and using fancy words, and NASA and different companies like biomedical companies or MIT might have their own words for it. So because there are so many words, and maybe I don't like fancy words all the time, I'm going to talk about the design process in pictures if I can. So some of the first steps that you do in the engineering design process is identify who you're designing for. There's this trend nowadays to be customer centric or human centered in the design process. So first, you go to your people, your customers, or whoever you're designing for, and figure out what are their concerns, what's freaking them out, or what questions do they have, what problem are they trying to solve. Maybe it's not just one person, but you got multiple people, and maybe it involves, other systems in there. Maybe it involves people or things that they care about in their lives. So go to these people and figure out what their deal is, what you got to solve for them. And after that, I mean, you got to do a lot of research. You do a lot of thinking. Maybe you'll read some books. These are my glasses representing that you're reading books. That's a book, and you might use a computer to research on the internet because you got to read more stuff, or you might do some math to do some modeling or some fancy calculus maybe. I don't know. Lots of different things to analyze whatever the problem is that these people are telling you about. And maybe it has to do with money, and you might define a special specification is one word we might use, but we'll get back into that. But after you do all that research, in general, you might get into that phase of being real creative. I mean, we have that symbol of the old style light bulb from the past that represents coming up with lots of ideas. Well, let's use that here. And you might have a lot of thinking to do at this point to try and be creative. That's a brain. That's what that's supposed to be. You might try to boost your creativity in other ways. Um, I mean, what's a symbol for creativity? I mean, for me personally, it's like really, really fun. So I love this phase, and so that's my symbol for that. And so after that, you've created all these different ideas for how to solve their problem. And so you got to kind of narrow down your ideas. I'm going to pick a single idea, for example. For example, that's what? A hand. I can't draw a hand. That's like me picking this thing up. So that's my hand, and I'm choosing a single solution here to look at. Or maybe I'm looking at like three. I'm narrowing down all my ideas. Maybe a better symbol is like I have a funnel and I'm putting all my ideas in it, and only a few of them are coming out for me to analyze. So I've selected the things that I really want to develop further, those solutions I want to develop further. Then what do? Well, I probably build something. I want to test those ideas. So maybe I'll use some tools like a hammer and some nails to prototype my solution, or I might use more computers to like code a solution, something like that. And I don't know, I'll use lots and lots of different tools to build stuff. And after that, you can't just assume that it works. You got to do some testing. So I'll have this whole list of tests, that I got to make sure it passes. And hopefully it'll pass 1, 2, 3. It'll pass all my tests. And maybe we'll go back to these people and they'll have to tell us, does it actually work or not? Uh, will it pass their tests? I mean, sure, it passed our tests over here as an engineer. I'll put a little hard hat here. That's my hard hat. The engineer's tests get passed, but what about the people tests? So somewhere around here are more people tests. There are other customers analyzing it and judging me and judging my design. So visually, I can look at this and remind myself, yes, engineering and design is very people-centered. And you have to do a lot of thinking, and you become creative, and you gotta make some sometimes hard choices about what you're really gonna build and test and design, and you actually have to implement it. You have to build it using whatever tools you have available. You got to be the engineer and make sure it passes all your criteria for success, and you got to bring it back to your people, to your customers, to see if it's a good design or not. And it's a giant circle because maybe you have to continue redesigning your solution. So this is a very fancy way of putting it, the design process. But like, you'll notice that in my book, remember Engineer's Guide to Improv and Art Games, I used special words because instead of drawing all these symbols out, it's sometimes easier to say, identify the need. I mean, that's a word you might see a lot when you talk about the design process. So you might talk about identifying. Stanford D School, Stanford Design School says empathize. You know what empathy is? Well, you might empathize with your customers. You might talk about, there are other things you might say. Identify the problem, identify the need. Here, you might say that the process is called researching the problem, or just modeling. People might use the fancy words of characterization, but if you're a kid, you might not know what that is, so you might not want to use that word. I just say learn, That's what I say in my book because that's simpler. And then here in this giant crazy smiling face, I say that we're ideating, if that fits in my screen here. That's a fancy word of saying get ideas for solutions, possible ideas. It doesn't have to be the solution. It just says get ideas. Imagine, some people say. Brainstorm. I don't know. These are all different things that people say. And like, I kind of get frustrated with all the different words that people use to describe similar things. That's why I like to draw my symbols now. What words do you use for describing the phase where you narrow down your ideas? Well, you might just say narrow down your ideas. I think in mine, I just say choose, select. That's what you might see in other organizations' design processes. Choose or select an idea to continue analyzing. Then over here, when you're actually building something to test, I call that prototype. You're not building a final design, you're building a prototype. You might just say build. At the University of Texas, there's a program that says embody. That's a fancy word. Again, you might not use that word if you're teaching little kids how to follow an engineering design process, but you get it. You're making something real. Let's be fancy. We might say reify, right? And then you've got all these other things. Yeah, you got to start testing, right? That's a very simple word. You got to test your design. Make sure it passes. I missed a step earlier up here where you might say define specifications. That's a fancy word that engineers might use. So in the beginning of your design process, you might specify what a good design will do. And over here, you'll test if it meets those specs or specifications. So you'll test. I don't want to erase my own drawings here, but you might evaluate, all this good stuff. You might verify. That's the idea of making sure your design does what you as the engineer want it to do, but then you might try to validate. And I'm going to put that up here because that involves your customers. Your customers have to approve your design. Your design has to actually do what your customers want, and that's validation. And there's a lot of like refinement that happens, or redesign, additional work that happens, and that might happen over and over, or it just happens in this little spot. There's a lot more fancy words you could use that I could add with my little pink marker here, but I'm not going to. So going back to this book that I was talking about in the beginning, this is all about playing fun games and exercises to help you at each step in this design process. But in particular, the first reaction that you might have is improv can help you with this ideate and imagine step right here when you're having a whole lot of fun. You know, that's kind of why I drew this fancy face here, because like you're in this phase over here where you have to be real creative, you know, creativity. I'll put that word here because people like using that. And improv can help so much in expanding your brain and just making you more able to collaborate with your team, all that other stuff. Over here, there's a lot of communication that's involved. You got to communicate with people outside your design team. You have to communicate with your customers. You have to communicate with users, people who are going to use your design. Definitely need some communication skills. Games can help you do that. Improv theater can help you communicate better. Engineers get a bad rap for not being good communicators, so that's what that helps with. And when you play improv games, it's funny, improv artists will say that it really helps your empathy. So Stanford D School, Stanford Design School would love that aspect of improv. Improv is supposed to help you see what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. And I'll just add in the noun form of that word, empathize, but empathy. Improv games are supposed to help you with empathy. And I also write in my book that throughout this entire process, there's so much opportunity for failure, especially when you're in this testing phase, right? Like, if it does not pass these tests here and it doesn't meet your specifications, you might fail and you might have to X out one of your designs and you might be sad. How do you deal with that? You might be angry, you know? But we don't want sadness and anger to win the day. We need to go back to our cycle here and end up on a real solution. We can't just stop here. And improv games can help you get a positive attitude. They can help you understand and react to failure and feel these emotions and be okay with it, learn from it, grow from it. So this is my design process that I'm going to talk about in Pios Labs. And I hope to create more videos about different tools you can use at each step in this design process. A lot of it comes from this book. It's really cool. And that's all I have to say. So thanks for watching, and I will post more stuff soon.